once again to the Equip podcast, where we believe the Christian should be the most well-read, the most well-informed person in the room. And we are going to continue where we left off. But really, I want you to understand my goal is not just information. My goal is for us to have wisdom. And it's interesting, actually, I got this from Dennis Prager. And I absolutely believe this. Of all the fields of inquiry out there, math and sciences and a lot of great fields to get into, but there's only one field of inquiry where we can learn wisdom, other than the Bible, of course. Wisdom comes from God, we're told. But other than that, where we can get wisdom from is history. We can learn from history, and I think we understand that. Deeply, we understand that. And that's why, really, in each lesson, we have gone back to history. We've looked at how we got to where we're at. I love this quote by Cicero. He was a Roman statesman, politician. He was really a philosopher. But he says this: to be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. I find that very interesting, and that's why I'm passionate about, I love to study history. I love to teach history. And those that know me see how history is interwoven really in so many of my messages and things I teach. Today, what we're going to look at, how did we get to this crazy place? And how did we get to this lawless place? Just recently in the news, I'll come bring up a few things that has happened recently, but it seems like this is increasing. And unless you've been sleeping for the last, few years, you realize it too. But actually, it's this shift toward lawlessness it's been within really just our civilian population. It's within the political and ruling class. We've seen a judge here in Milwaukee not that long ago try to spirit away an illegal alien up before her for some crimes. And she knew ICE was there, and she tried to smuggle this guy, tried to get him out of there and set him free. And he was up for some pretty serious charges other than being illegal. And this is a judge. Well, that's lawlessness. Among those that are, in this case, voted to uphold justice and uphold the law. Now, the entire theme of the Bible, and you realize this, God is a God of love and of justice. He's many other things also, obviously, but boy, if you want to put your finger on two things, he's a God of love, obviously, we see that, and he's a God of justice. In fact, I want to read Micah 6:8 to you. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. The first thing that's mentioned is to do justly. The preamble of our Constitution, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, the first thing on the list, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and it goes on. So important in society. There needs to be justice. Now, the God of the Old Testament, we're told, is so harsh. What a lot of critics bring up and atheists bring up is this idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And it goes on. And that seems so barbaric, some say. Well, actually, back in the day, it was an eye. You poke up my eye, I'm going to take your head, I'm going to take your wife's head, and I'm going to take all your children's heads. That was the pagan way. And that's how it was. So this revolutionary idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was actually amazingly merciful and really just and fair, if you think about it. It's exactly, the punishment exactly fits the crime. An eye, exactly for an eye. a tooth for a tooth. Not your eye, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to poke out both your daughter's eyes. See, that's unjust. A poor man's eye was the same as a rich man's eye in this system. It seems very barbaric, but actually it was for the times, it was very revolutionary and very just. We're told in the millennium, Jesus will reign with a rod of iron. And that kind of goes back to the Old Testament a little bit in that idea. And again, critics talk about this, how harsh it was, how barbaric it was to stone adulterers, to stone a homosexual act, even to stone children that smarted off to their parents. Well, so the critic would see the Bible as it must have been just awash in blood and stonings. We can't even work that we're stoning so many people. Or maybe it was like this. Because you knew the punishment was death, maybe you'd stay faithful to your wife. Maybe you wouldn't even think of a homosexual act. Maybe the kids obeyed their parents. Maybe that's the way it was. Now, you can call that what you want, but I just bet people behaved back then. Just a thought. Now, the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24:12, it says this in the last days. And of course, that Olivet Discourse talks about the last days and a lot of the things to look for. But one of the things says this, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Now, that idea of iniquity shall abound is the idea of lawlessness. So lawlessness will get worse. It'll become more and more lawless in the last days. And the love of many shall wax cold. Boy, isn't that a description of today? And I think we all, maybe I'm plugged in more than some people, but if you're plugged into what's going on, and it's across the board, it's not just in America. Well, I don't think it's because men's hearts have changed. Men's hearts are evil, and we can go back, things are getting worse and worse. Well, before the flood, it was really bad because men's hearts are wicked. So I don't think that changed. I don't think men's hearts are getting more evil. I believe it's the parenting and the justice system has changed. Proverbs 28:5 says this. Evil men understand not judgment, but they that seek the Lord understand all things. Boy, that's a profound statement in Proverbs. Evil men understand not judgment. And again, what a statement that we see today. We see, like I said, I'd mentioned some things that have just recently happened. We are just last weekend, I think it was, in Cincinnati. There was several people at a music extravaganza, whatever, some music. I think it was blues or a thing they do in the city once a year. But there was some beatings on the street, and they got caught on video. And of course, everybody's talking about it right now. Well, I just heard today, the fella that knocked out a woman, 4 days ago, he was before a judge for weapons charges. And he was let out with hardly any bail whatsoever, and he's back on the street, and he's now committing more felonies, and there's more victims. I heard a statistic. I'm not even going to try to tell you what it is because I'll be so far off. But in one bigger city, they've got a list of about, we'll say, 100 individuals who are committing, and it'll be close, 95% of all the crimes. You just got this sliver of humanity that, well, they keep letting them out and they keep getting into more trouble. And there's thousands of victims. In one place, what did I hear? The average was 38 victims per criminal. 38 victims. And they keep letting them out. Well, Proverbs 28:5 tells us, evil men understand not judgment. And for years, I've been scratching my head. And early on when I got saved, because I'm very plugged in politically and societally, I guess. But I always scratch my head. Why are the liberals, one of them, the ACLU, they're really soft on crime. They're pro-criminal. They're always worried about the criminal's rights. Of course, they're anti-death penalty. They feel deeply today for the illegal aliens. They hate the police. They hate ICE. They hate law enforcement. They talked about defunding the police. And I just scratched my head. How can you be so anti? No regard for victims whatsoever, because each time you have a bleeding heart toward the criminal and you let the criminal out, there's going to be more victims. Oh, well, at least he's free. And of course, they hate the God of the Old Testament. He's a monster, they say, because of that harsh judgment. Well, evil men understand not judgment. They don't understand that harsh. Those that fear God understand all things. We understand. And I believe, to tell you the truth, I believe with that mentality, I think you're a better parent. You know when you have to sometimes come down hard on a child. You're not going to get away with that. Well, and that'll teach them they won't end up a criminal, probably. But it's interesting, this ideology that is angry with the God of the Old Testament when he punishes, he's a God of judgment. And by the way, that so-called barbaric judgment, people behave better. If I could write a law, we're going to talk about the law next time and get a little more in depth into law, because we're talking about law enforcement. So law, you're going to find it real fascinating. But this same group, this is interesting. They are all about the murder of unborn babies. They're pro-assisted suicide. They're actually political cousins with the Marxists who have murdered 100 million people. This ideology of death. So that ideology is so strange. Anti-authority in God, hate God, and are all about the criminals, but then love communists. Like I said, if I could write one law, and I know it's silly, but it's a good illustration. If you don't put your grocery cart away into the cart corral, 1 year in prison. You say, that's crazy, that's harsh. I bet everybody puts their cart away. So we're concerned about what would happen to the criminal. Oh, we can't be so. Maybe people would actually put their cart away, their grocery cart, if they knew there was harsh punishment. Now, Romans 13, 1 through 4 really gives us this scriptural ideal when it comes to policing. Let me read it. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. Now listen real close. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Now, I believe here it couldn't describe, I guess, what we'd call the law enforcement or the police officer, ICE and marshals, but law enforcement. Well, several things that it says here. Law enforcement has been given a sword. Well, first of all, they've been given authority by God. The only authority comes from God. Parents are given some of that authority. Hey, you have authority over your children. God has given that to a pastor. You have authority over your church. And then God has given that to the military and to police officers. You've been given authority by God. You've also been given, in their case, a sword with the authority to use it. Now, they carry sidearms. They carry guns. Military does too. And, of course, police officers. What's that sword for? A revenger. Now, remember, God said, revenge is mine, saith the Lord. Well, what he does, he gives them the authority of revenge. They're a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Now, it talks about fearing that authority here. They that resist the power. Well, watch what happens. Is this where we're at? That sword that has been given in a lot of areas, not everywhere, but that sword has been sheathed. Therefore, there's no fear of authority because they know the sword has been put away. And hence the lawlessness. See, two things are going on. I don't think the heart of man necessarily has become more evil, but when authority puts their sword in the sheath and they say, well, we're not going to do anything. And times, lawlessness, iniquity will increase. It doesn't say why. I believe because the authorities have lost their guts, if you will. They've sheathed that sword. And therefore, everybody realizes. Now, it's interesting to see when you're driving in a car and you're driving along and maybe you're on the highway and you come across this whole group of cars that is just, they're barely going, we'll say the speed limit is 55. They're going 54 miles an hour, all of them. And you're, what is going on? You're, changing lanes and trying to figure out what's going on. Just this group of cars. Well, as you get through the cars, you see in the middle is a sheriff. And isn't it something? This whole concept of God and God is watching you. Watch what happens when there's an authority figure around people. What do? Boy, they do right. They slow down. They're going to be more obedient when there's an authority there. That's the whole idea, folks. Now, next time, like I said, and we'll see you next time, we're going to go into the law itself. We're talking about law enforcement. What about this concept of law? You'll find it interesting.